like that, then you gotta look at me as I come up here, so sorry about that. But thank you for having us come in this morning. We just wanted to talk with you guys a little bit about FCA and what Bruce and I have been taking on for a challenge here in Northwest Iowa. And it's terrible to get older than I got to cheat on my glasses. I need to write bigger on my notes. But so I look at the slide. Okay, I got to get myself acquainted here. So okay, we'll go to the next slide, John. FCA has been around since 1954, and myself, where I first learned about FCA was when I got to St. Louis, played with the St. Louis Rams. Our team chaplain was an FCA guy, Walt Enoch, and they started FCA back in, I don't know if it was right away in the 50s, but it was the 50s or 60s, something like that. He's 91 now. Of course, at that time, he was 70-something and had a BlackBerry, but which was pretty cool. He was a great guy, knew his Bible, awesome. Discipled me, helped me grow in my faith. I gave my life to the Lord when I was at the Packers through an influence of teammates, other athletes. So I know that was, and we had an Athletes in Action chaplain there in Green Bay. So when I got to St. Louis and met Walt, I was ready really to continue growing in my faith and my relationship with the Lord. And it was an awesome step for me and my wife together. That's probably been the biggest blessing. We both grew in our faith kind of at the same time. So that's been awesome for our marriage and our kids and all that. So I served on the board in St. Louis, the metro area board that we had there, and we did some fundraising and all that. But I got one of the requirements was to go to a huddle meeting, and it was over at one of the coaches' houses in St. Charles where I live, and got to watch some of the kids were basically running the huddle. So we got to watch the kids in this FCA huddle basically telling about their faith to other kids, and I was just blown away because we didn't have FCA in Cherokee when I grew up. And I know I said to myself right then and there, I was like, when we moved back to Cherokee, that was the plan my wife and I had, was to move back to Cherokee, and we got done playing football. And I tell people, it's like, I need to play pro football so I could afford to farm for a few years, but we wanted to bring FCA back when we got there. When I volunteered coached football for a few years when my son was in high school, I did run a football huddle there as well. And we had a rep for a little bit of that time, and then he left. But with a rep, with an area rep, like what Bruce does now, to supply you with those resources and encourage you and give you those things that can make your huddle really great, it made it a whole lot better. So then I was working for Icon Ag and Turf. I was the general manager there, and I really feel like God was training me then for this job now in Northwest Iowa as the area director. A big part of my job is staff development and how we're going to deploy the resources, mostly people, and do an excellent job of ministry in Northwest Iowa. So I really feel like God was at that time training me to do this, and I think it's building a team. Right now you're looking at the entire Northwest Iowa team, so so we're a small team, but we're looking for volunteers as we grow. There are so many awesome things that we can bring, and we're going to continue to bring. We've been forming a board. We have 17 people on our board right now in Northwest Iowa, and our first board meeting was back in June, and actually their wisdom was, well, don't try to do too much at once. We were just going to stick with the 13 huddles that we were handed when Bruce and I took over in about March, and they said try to make those huddles as good as they can be before we try to grow this thing. And I won't steal any of Bruce's thunder, but as people have found out we're doing FCA, we've had a ton of people contact us, want to start huddles and do those kinds of things, and we've just kind of built time in, and we're not going to turn anybody away that wants to start a huddle, and I'll give Bruce all the props there. He's very organized and has gotten back to people and networked, and him and I go together and we talk to administrative people, and right now it's been pretty amazing. Some of the schools we went into, the administrators we've talked to, I really think God has placed some Christian men and women in these schools and in these positions for a time where we can get God back into schools. And I did serve on the Iowa board for a while until I took this position, and I kind of got booted off because it was a little weird. But we did set a goal of having a coach for Christ in every school in Iowa, and we have 58 high schools and 5 colleges, as you can see on the board, and that's our 17 counties. So we put on a lot of miles going from corner to corner. I can't say I've done that in the same day, but Bruce has done it the same day from Carroll to Larchwood. So he's put on a lot of miles, but we both have put on a lot of miles, just trying to rekindle some of those FCA stories that are out there with coaches and just people in the community too that aren't coaching anymore, but they're working in the community, but they remember FCA in their high school and that FCA made a difference to them. So the mission, I want to share the mission and vision of FCA. The vision of FCA is to see the world transformed by Jesus Christ through the influence of athletes and coaches. And like I say, I personally saw that happen on our team, how I was influenced by other coaches, or by other athletes. I remember Reggie White saying after a practice one day, Coach Holmer was like, okay, bring it up, guys, bring it up, it's in training camp. And Reggie's like, guys, we're going to have a Bible study in the basement of the dorms tonight. Of course, I was like, 7th round draft choice, way deep on the depth chart, you know. I'm like, it's going to take a lot of prayer to make this team, so I am going to go to this thing. So I get there bright and early, and I see these guys walking in. And I've been around just long enough through mini camps and the off-season program and a little bit of training camp at that point. But I noticed these guys walking in the room. They weren't the guys that were spending time at the bars or talking about cheating on their wives or treating the rookies decent and those kind of things. So I was like, right then and there it hit me that God had a plan for my life, and I wasn't living the way He wanted me to live. So they changed my life through the influence of other athletes and coaches. I had some Christian coaches along the way too that I planted some seeds and played a part in that. So let's see. Oh, I want to talk about too, just the mission, to lead every coach and athlete into a growing relationship with Jesus Christ and His church. So I also want to point out, and His church, it means we are really partners with the local churches. FCA is not 24/7. Sports in our culture now has become a huge thing. As you guys know, people are starting to play when they're this big now, playing and driving all over. I talked to a guy who was taking his 5th grader to a volleyball tournament not that long ago down in Texas. He lives in Northwest Iowa, which I thought was kind of crazy. Really, that's a long ways for a 7th grader to be going. But we do know how sports has become a huge part of our culture, and I think FCA is a great fit to spread the gospel. That's what we're called to do in Matthew 28, spread the gospel. And so I won't talk too long. I know John only gives a short period of time. We'll go to the next video, and I'll hand it off to Bruce. Good morning.
There was a slide a little bit further back that kind of said that FCA is the largest and fastest growing sports ministry in the world. So when Adam talked about the 5th grader going down to Texas from Northwest Iowa to play sports, there are 58.3 million youth in America alone playing sports. FCA allows us to give the platform into the schools to bring those kids, use sports as the vehicle, but through coaches as the driver and athletes as passengers to put other people into that vehicle to bring them closer to God. So we go first, our strategy is to and through the coach. So we seek ministry first to coaches' hearts, marriages, and families, and then when ready, we will minister through their athletes. So our goal, next one please, John, is we have 3 methods. To engage those coaches that, like Christ, have Christ in their lives, to equip those coaches through our resources, and then that ultimately will empower them to share the gospel clearly to their athletes and their students as they walk their lives throughout the day in the public schools or in a parochial school. Huddles. So what is a huddle? We talk about huddles other than looking at sports huddle where everybody's gathered together. Well, an FCA huddle is a gathering where the gospel of Christ is shared and where coaches, students, athletes, teachers will grow in their faith. One thing we always want to say is FCA is not a secret society, okay? All students and athletes, coaches, and teachers are welcome to attend and become a part of it. Each huddle is supported by us as FCA staff, and we have coaches huddles and we have campus huddles, okay? So here's a look at a little snapshot of us entering the 2018-19 school year, and Adam had said back in March when we got ourselves into this whole ministry thing, which we never thought we'd probably end up doing, but here we are. God does crazy things to crazy people, and we're 2 crazy guys, right? So they told us that there was 13 huddles in Northwest Iowa, 13 certified huddles with the state, okay? So like South O'Brien here, Mr. Brasser is a certified huddle, so he was one of those 13. Well, as we start exposing ourselves and seeing that, hey, this is something we want to do, and our focus is to and through the coach, we get into I have 6 coaches huddles that I'm a part of, Okay, so I am coming to where those coaches and teachers are and ministering to them with curriculum based off of sports. But teachers, we want to say to the teachers that you are a life coach in your classroom. Okay, so when we talk about a coach's huddle, we have a small group. I do have a group that has 13 in it. Okay, so we break into 2 groups during those morning sessions. But the goal with that is if we can reach the heart of the coach, the heart of the teacher, ultimately that will reach the students and athletes. So if we come out of a morning devotional that I've got 6 coaches at, and we just had a powerful, great devotional, those 6 coaches and teachers have each 5 classes a day with 15 to 25 kids in it, that those kids see something different about those coaches and teachers as they come to the classroom. So you take that times 5 days a week with school, the impact is great with that. So, and like I said, we've got 6 coaches huddles, and we now are up to 22 campus huddles. So anything you see in red is new entering the 2018-2019 school year. So yes, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. And like Adam said, there's been mornings where I take off and head to Sergeant Bluff, head to Haywarden, head to Carroll, Sloan. You know, just it is a huge territory for us, and there needs to be more people like us to support that, to do it justice, to love on the coaches and teachers so that they can ultimately love on the athletes and students. So the next part is,
how can you become part of the team? There are so many things that we just read a training deal down in Central Iowa. So many things that we could do. We do need more staff eventually, and we'll do it on God's time. But we did want to make an ask this morning of Sutherland Church of Christ. We're looking for 10 churches to join together and support us at a $250 a month level. And my goal there is we can hire another staff person. That would equal about $2,500 a month, which equals about half of what it would cost for a staff person to come on board with us in 2019. So I'm going to ask you guys to consider that as being part of your missions and outreach program. I know my church, we have trouble getting into schools and doing a lot of outreach and getting more new people to come to church and those kind of things. So if you guys would consider that. Like I say, we're building our team, and there's a lot of things we could do. There's a chaplain program that we heard about in Central Iowa, which is awesome. They were telling us they have 34 chaplains that basically adopt a team, whether it's a football team, basketball team, volleyball, whatever it is. They adopt a team and then provide chapels at the head coach's discretion. And I kind of raised my hand about how many of those people are actually pastors. Well, it was less than 10 out of those 34 people. So it was volunteers, it was lay people, a lot of, like everybody here today, people that just want to spread the gospel. We're all called to make disciples out there, and to all nations, basically, Matthew 28. So there's different ways you can get involved as well on an individual basis, but we wanted to make the ask of you guys. We're down at Camp Novoa, had a good time this summer. Wonderful camp down there. We got to watch John grab the bus, which was impressive, I'll mention. But we don't want to talk too long, so we don't want you to be mad at John for getting out late. But thank you very much for allowing us to come speak with you guys this morning.
I want to thank them for coming and sharing with us this morning. And as I think we know and understand, sports is a big part of our society, and we've seen it be a wonderful outreach as we built the gym here in town and reached out to young people. At this time, we are going to head into our sermon, and so I would like to invite Abby Woodall to come up and read scripture for us. We are in Ruth chapter 2 this morning. Ruth chapter 2 and our series on hope in the midst of hopelessness.
Dear woman, listen to me. Don't pick up grain in any other field. Don't go anywhere else. Stay here with the woman who worked for me. Keep your eye on the field where the men are cutting grain. Walk behind the women who are gathering it. Pick up the grain that is left. I've told the men not to bother you. When you are thirsty, go and get a drink. Take water from the jars the men have filled.
Good morning and welcome, and we are in our second week on the series, Hope in the Midst of Hopelessness, and we are looking at the book of Ruth. So last week we opened up and explored Ruth chapter 1, And if you need a refresher or missed last week, I'll just give it to you briefly here. I'll catch you up. There was a man named Elimelech. And Elimelech, along with his wife Naomi and their 2 sons, moved from Bethlehem. And we're familiar with Bethlehem. That's where Jesus is born. They moved from Bethlehem to a neighboring country called Moab. Now, the reason that they moved was there was a famine in the land, and so there wasn't enough food, there wasn't enough to provide. And so Elimelech, trying to save his family, trying to provide for his family, uproots his family and moves to a neighboring country. Now, while in Moab, Elimelech dies, and Naomi's 2 sons get married. And they marry foreign women, they marry Moabite women. And then both of her sons die. And the situation for Naomi becomes very dire. If you recall, we talked a little bit about what it means to be a widow in those days. Women cannot just go and get a job. It is not like you can just go and provide for yourself in this time and in this era. No, the widow was required to rely upon the kindness of her family to provide for her. And so Naomi is in a tough spot. Her husband is dead, her 2 sons are dead, and she is in a country far away from family, and she is expected to rely on family to provide for her. So this is a very difficult situation that Naomi finds herself in, and it's just a tough situation all the way around. And the end of Ruth chapter 1 ends with this little glimmer of hope. That although Naomi is mad at God and she is upset with the situation and she's gone through, there's a glimmer of hope. Because she hears that back in Bethlehem, back there, that God has provided food once again. And so she takes one of her daughter-in-laws, one turns back and goes home to Moab, but she takes one of her daughter-in-laws, named Ruth, and heads back to Bethlehem. And that's where we catch up today. I think for most of us, we understand Ruth chapter 1. We have been in difficult situations in our life. We go through hard times, hopelessness. Things happen and it is hopeless. We lose a loved one, or we get in a car accident, or we get fired, or we hear the doctor say words like cancer, or a spouse say divorce. And our world falls apart, and we sit there feeling very much like Naomi, who says, "Don't call me Naomi," which means sweetie or something like that, kind of loosely translated. Call me Mara, because it means bitter, and I'm bitter. And she makes no doubt about it. She is bitter. God's hand has come against her, and she is mad at God. Most of us understand Ruth chapter 1 because we've experienced it. And when something bad happens, it doesn't come alone. Bad things happen, and there's this hopelessness that overcomes us, this hopelessness that just is a cloud on our life. But they go home. And you begin to start to wonder, how is God going to provide for them? Ruth chapter 1 ended with a glimmer of hope because it told us that they arrived as the barley harvest began. There's going to be food in town. But a person has to sit here and read this story and wonder, but how does that help Ruth and Naomi? They didn't farm. They didn't plant the crops. How is that going to help them if there's food in the town? It reminds me a little bit of when I was young. I think I was probably 5th and 6th grade. I made it a little bit later than that. I guess we moved to the farm. So a little bit later than that, we were living on the farm, and there were some 2nd and 3rd cousins that they had grown up in California. Their mom had grown up on the farm, but she moved to California a long time ago. And so these are distant relatives, and they came back to visit for a family reunion. And I remember having hearing Dad talk about the conversation as one of his cousins or second cousin, far away distant relatives, they're showing him the farm, and this cousin asked Dad, "So how much of this is ours?" and Dad's like, "None of it." but there's that mentality. You come home, how much of this is ours? And for Naomi and Ruth, they didn't plant the fields. They didn't work the ground. This isn't theirs, so that there's still the question, while there's this glimmer of hope that there's food in the land once again, how is God going to provide? How is God going to provide? Ruth chapter 2, verse 2. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor." Naomi said, "Go ahead, my daughter." So she went out, entered a field, and began to glean behind the harvesters. Now, in these days, there were no government programs. There was no, you don't make so much money, so the government's going to take care of you and just give you a check. There's nothing like that. But God had provided for his people in other ways. God had set down in his law, in the first 5 books of the Bible, he had set down some rules. Because he said, you know what, there are people that will not be able to take care of themselves, and so we need to leave food behind. And so he instructs the farmer, if you drop that, if you drop some of your harvest and it spills on the ground, don't pick it all up. Leave it there for the widow. Leave it there for the orphan. Leave it there for that person that can't provide for themselves. And beyond that, God says, I want you to leave the end rows of your fields. I want you to leave the end rows of your field so that the widow or the orphan or the traveler, as they are walking about and as they have no means of eating and providing for themselves, that they might be able to pick it and have something to eat and something to survive. And we actually see when Jesus is teaching in the New Testament, there's one place where he's walking and he's eating as he's walking. This is one of those situations. They had left the end rows. As the teachers of the law came to question him, he was eating and picking as he went along. And so this was common for their culture. And so Ruth, as a widow, says to her mother-in-law, let me go and see what I can get. Let me go and see if there isn't some food that we can live, that we can provide, that we can make it through. I want to pick up the end or middle of chapter, verse 3. As it turned out, she was working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. Just then, Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. The Lord be with you. The Lord bless you, they answered. Boaz asked the overseer of his harvesters, who does that young woman belong to? Now, these verses are kind of interesting. Now, Ruth has gone out and she has just picked a field at random. And she has just gone out and picked a field and begun to work in this field behind the men there, and she's picking up what is left over. And the Bible makes out, just then, there's something in these verses, the author is multiple times saying it over and over again to give you a clue. Just then, as it turns out, just so happened. Okay? He's trying to make this point. The author is making a point with these verses. It just so happened that the field Ruth chose to belonged to a relative. Now, she's from Moab, and so she doesn't know whose land this is. Even if Naomi told her, you know how we give directions around here. I mean, yeah, you go down to the Peterson place and you head north, and then you turn west where the old windmill used to be. I think that's how we give directions. And so you get the idea. Ruth doesn't know whose field she is in. This is purely by the will of God. This is God intervening in her life. But the author is trying to make a point. It just so happened. It's just dumb luck that Ruth happened to be in this field. And it just so happened that this man Boaz, who's wealthy and has no reason to be in the field. I mean, he's got, not just does he have workers who pick his field, but he has people that are in charge of the workers to pick his field. Like, this man is wealthy. He doesn't need to be there. But it just so happens that on this day, in this field, Boaz comes out. And it just so happens that Ruth catches his eye. And all these coincidences, and all these things, and the author is mocking the idea that these things happen by chance. He's mocking the idea that this happened by chance or by happenstance or that, hey, this is just dumb luck. He's mocking that idea. We are to understand that while Naomi and Ruth have experienced trial after trial, God is still looking out for them. God is still looking out for them. Now, although they have lost their husbands, although they have lost their homes, although they have no food to eat and no place to live, God is still looking out for them. And there's a point to be made there. We are talking about providence. Providence is God supplying for us. God providing for us. Probably the best idea of providence that we see in the entire the Scripture, the entire the Old Testament, it comes when Abraham is taking his son Isaac up to the mountain to sacrifice him. And over again the phrase comes up, the Lord himself will provide. The Lord himself will provide. Providence. God is going to take care of it. We don't know how. We don't know what he's going to do, but we trust that he will provide. We trust that God is going to be kind and that God is going to be good, and we trust in his providence. Providence, God's goodness on display in our deepest and darkest moments. We are to know that God will provide. That God will make it so that we can get through. And it's not to say that you're not going to have dark moments. I mean, this is not a prosperity gospel. You are going to go through tough times. There's not a person who followed Jesus who didn't have a tough time. It happens. It's part of life. Our health, our loved one, we lose things and it hurts. But God still cares. And even in our darkest moments, he is still there, working in the background, working for our good. The author keeps saying, it just so happened. It just so happened, and it just so happened, and it just so happened, but the whole time, it is God working out his plan in their lives. There's no coincidence here. There's no good luck. It is God. Verses 8 and 9. So Boaz said to Ruth, my daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with the women who work for me. Watch the field where the men are harvesting, and follow along after the women. I have told the men not to lay a hand on you, and whenever you're thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars that the men have filled. I want you to remember last week, Ruth takes place in the time of the Judges. Okay? And we studied the Judges this spring, and the Judges, that is a nasty time in Israel's history. It is a lawless time. It is, remember, everyone did what they saw good in their own eyes. Okay, and that's kind of God's way of saying everyone just did whatever they wanted. It is not a good time. And so Boaz, he is concerned about Naomi. He says, you go to another field, the men might mess with you there. You go somewhere else. You might not be taken care of if you go somewhere else. Stay here and I will take care of you. I will be good to you. You can go and get water that my men have collected. You will be taken care of. Stay here and get all that you need. And the narrative has changed. No longer is this woman questioning, why me, God? Why do you allow such pain? But instead she begins questioning, why would someone show me such kindness? Why would someone be so good to me? Verse 10, at this she bowed down with her face to the ground, and she asked him, why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner? And Boaz replied, I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. How you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Boaz is kind to Ruth. He is kind to Ruth in a day when people aren't kind. He is a good man in a day when the world is lawless. And Boaz is kind to her. Not only does he protect her, but he invites her, come and eat bread with me. Come and drink of my wine. And he tells the men, you know what? Don't just allow her to come and harvest and pick up the extra. Throw a little more down. Get a little off on your cornrows and knock a few rows down. And that type of mentality. Knock some down so that she has more to pick up. That's what he tells his men. And he shows this kindness. This kindness. And Ruth stays and she harvests here. And when she had threshed it and returns home on the day, she has the equivalent of a 50-pound bag. And this is an enormous amount. It's an enormous amount. And this is an abnormal situation. And Naomi, we remember Naomi. Naomi's the, don't call me Naomi, I'm not a sweetheart anymore. Call me Mara because I am bitter and God has raised his hand against me. And all of a sudden Naomi's tune starts to change. And Naomi looks at this big bag of grain that she has brought home. Where did you glean today? Where did you work? Blessed is the man who took notice of you. She knows something's up. Something special has happened, Ruth. There's something particularly good going on here. And what is it? And so Ruth tells Naomi all about her day. And Naomi, her spirit is changing. Changing from the bitter woman, from that no good will ever come to me. The kindness shown Ruth this day changes Naomi, and she hears it's Boaz. And she says, he has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead. Talking about God. God hasn't taken away his kindness. God still cares about us, Ruth. It is this hope that's finally back in her life. You know what? God still has a plan for me. That despite the hell that we went through, we are still taken care of. We're still taken care of. Naomi adds, Boaz was a family member. Boaz is family to my husband Elimelech. And not only that, he is a redeemer of the family. A redeemer. Now, a kinsman redeemer is a little bit beyond what we talked about last week. A kinsman redeemer had the job of, in the Old Testament, to care for the nearest relative. A nearby relative would redeem the family, marry a young widow, and provide for her. And Boaz happens to be a redeemer. Boaz just happens to be a redeemer. The man that she wandered into his field, and the man that just happened to show up in his field that day, and the man that just happened to notice her, happens to be a redeemer. And you say, is there a chance? No. God's providential kindness has shown through. You can't do it. God in his providence is showering Ruth and Naomi with kindness. And he has orchestrated every little thing to bring it back to them. Naomi and Ruth have lost so much. And they have been hurt so deeply. And maybe you feel like them today. Whether you're as bitter as Naomi or maybe you're still holding on to a little hope like Ruth. But you've lost it. You've lost somebody close to you and you are in pain and it hurts and you say, why God? You've gone through the divorce and you say, God, why would you tear apart my family? You've lost somebody, you've lost your job, something has hurt you. And you understand what these women feel like. Because we've been there. Never forget that God is in the background. Even when you don't see him at work, that kindness, that glimmer of hope, God has plans for you. And you might go through some rough times, but God still loves you. God has still planned good for you. Boaz is the Redeemer. A good man showing kindness. Boaz sets the stage for what a Redeemer looks like. A Redeemer, the providential kindness of a Redeemer. But as great as Boaz was, he pales in comparison to the Redeemer that you and I have. Because we have a Redeemer who's better than Boaz. We have a Redeemer who is better than any Redeemer you read about in the Scriptures who took on somebody that didn't deserve him. That took on somebody that was in a low time. We have a better Redeemer because we have Jesus as our Redeemer. Who looks at us in our pain and our sorrow and says, I will take you under my wing. And I will protect you, and I will lift you up, and I will keep you safe. Jesus is our Redeemer. He's the Redeemer that we deserve. He's the ultimate Redeemer who shows us his loving kindness. He's the one that no matter your struggle, he can help you through. He's the Redeemer who can take your debts away and wash you clean. He's the Redeemer who takes our sorrow and turns it into joy, who takes our tears and dries them from our face. We have a Redeemer who is so amazing. And all we need to do is fall at his feet today. And so some of you, for the first time, you've never fallen at the feet of your Redeemer and said, I need someone who looks out for me. who cares for me despite my past, despite my flaws and my failures and my shortcomings. I need that Redeemer. And so some of you this morning need to give your life for the very first time. Some of you, you've turned away and you've lived your life for yourself. You knew it, but you've walked away. You've run off to a foreign country and you have forgotten the goodness of your God, and that He cares for you and that He would carry you through anything. And today you need to return home to your Redeemer. Today you need to call upon His name once more. This morning, these are our challenges. Whether you need the Redeemer for the first time, or whether you need to recommit to that Redeemer, or whether you're sitting here and saying, I've gone through hard times and I've lost hope. We all have a place in this story. As the praise team comes up, I hope and pray that you will turn to this Redeemer. You'll turn to Him for your hope. And He would take you under His wing and lift you up. That you will remember the providential kindness of our God, and that things like this don't happen by happenstance, but our God is always at work in the background for your good. Would you stand with us?